The calm before the storm. The heat of summer lay heavy over Cedar Grove, a sleepy town known for its charming streets and quiet routines. Nestled at the end of a narrow, tree-lined lane was the modest home of the Browns. The small house, though unassuming, was alive with the kind of warmth only a loving family could generate. Inside, 15-year-old Nia Brown sat in her usual spot on the couch, her gaze fixed on the family television. She scrolled aimlessly through her phone, her mind elsewhere. Born with cerebral palsy, Nia had spent her life navigating challenges most people couldn't fathom. But she was strong, stronger than most gave her credit for. She had her father, Adam, and younger brother, Jordan, by her side, and their love had always been her anchor. On this particular day, however, an unease hung in the air. Adam had called earlier, his voice calm but laced with an undertone of concern. He said he'd be late coming home, a rare occurrence for the dependable man who always made dinner a family event. As the afternoon wore on, Nia remained on the couch, her thoughts occasionally wandering to her father. She noticed her younger brother Jordan in the backyard, his laughter faint as he tossed a ball to their excitable golden retriever, Max. Their mother, Elise, was in the kitchen, humming a tune as she prepared dinner. Suddenly, the sound of a car pulling up outside interrupted the peaceful rhythm of their home. Nia glanced out the window, her heart skipping a beat, as a police cruiser rolled to a stop in front of their house. Two officers stepped out, their movements sharp and deliberate. One of them, a towering figure with a hardened expression, was Officer Derek Morales. The man's name was whispered in the town with a mixture of fear and disdain. His reputation for using excessive force had made him a dark presence in Cedar Grove. The other officer, a younger woman named Sarah Reed, followed him hesitantly, her expression uneasy. Nia frowned and tapped the window lightly. "Mom," she called, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Elise emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her smile faded when she saw the patrol car and the two officers standing outside. "Stay here," Elise said firmly, her tone protective as she moved toward the door. But before she could open it, the doorbell rang, loud and insistent. Nia's heart raced. She reached for her phone and quickly texted her father. "Two cops outside. What's happening?" His reply came almost instantly. "Stay inside. Don't open the door. I'm on my way." Elise hesitated by the door, peering through the peephole. "What do you want?" she called through the door, her voice strong but cautious. "Ma'am, we need to speak with your daughter, Nia," Morales said gruffly. His tone carried an authority that made Nia shiver. "She's a minor," Elise shot back. "You have no right to speak to her without her parents present." "That's not how this works, ma'am," Morales snapped, his patience visibly thin. He turned to Sarah and muttered something under his breath, but the younger officer seemed hesitant. Elise stood her ground, her hand gripping the doorknob tightly. "My husband is on his way," she said. "You can speak to him." But Morales wasn't interested in waiting. With a sudden force, he slammed his shoulder into the door, causing Elise to stumble back in shock. The door swung open, and the two officers stepped inside. Elise moved quickly to block them, her voice rising. "You can't do this. Get out of my house." "Step aside, ma'am," Morales ordered coldly. "We're not here to cause trouble, unless you make it." Nia's pulse pounded in her ears. She clutched her phone tightly, her fingers trembling as she dialed her father's number. "Dad," she whispered when he picked up. "They're inside. Lock yourself in a room, Nia. Don't engage with them." "I'm almost there," Adam said, his voice steady but urgent. Before she could respond, Morales turned his sharp gaze on her. "You," he barked, pointing at Nia. "We need to ask you some questions. Sit down and stay still." Nia froze, her instincts screaming at her to run. But where would she go? Her cane was propped against the wall, and her legs already felt weak from the adrenaline surging through her body. "What do you want with my daughter?" Elise demanded, her voice shaking but determined. She hasn't done anything. That's for us to determine, Morales said, taking a step closer to Nia. You want to make this easy for everyone. Then sit down and cooperate. Nia's fear began to morph into something else. Anger. She straightened her posture, meeting Morales's gaze with as much defiance as she could muster. I didn't do anything wrong, she said firmly. Morales scoffed, his lips curling into a sneer. We'll see about that. The tension in the room was suffocating. Sarah Reeves stood near the doorway, her face pale and uncertain. It was clear she was uncomfortable, but she didn't step in. Morales's reputation loomed large, and no rookie wanted to challenge him. Nia's grip on her phone tightened as she took a deep breath. Her father's words echoed in her mind. Don't engage with them. But how could she stay silent while this man treated her like a criminal in her own home? Just as Morales stepped closer, Nia's phone buzzed again. It was another text from Adam. I'm here. Stay strong. Relief washed over her as she heard the familiar sound of her father's truck pulling into the driveway. Morales noticed her shift in expression and turned toward the window, his jaw tightening as Adam stepped out of the vehicle. The next few moments would change everything. A father's wrath. Adam Brown's footsteps were deliberate and heavy as he approached the house, each one an unspoken promise of the storm he carried within. The evening sun cast long shadows across the yard, highlighting the intensity on his face. He wasn't a man prone to violence or theatrics, but in this moment, he wasn't just a father. He was a force of nature. He saw the open door, heard the tense voices within, and his heart clenched at the thought of Nia, his brave, resilient daughter, facing whatever horror awaited inside. He'd always taught his children to stand tall, to fight for what was right. But this was different. This wasn't a lesson in courage. This was survival. As he reached the threshold, he stopped. His broad shoulders squared, his fists tightened at his sides, and his jaw set like granite. From within the house, Officer Morales's grating voice reached him. You don't seem to understand, Hid. We ask the questions, and you answer them. Adam stepped inside, his presence filling the room like a sudden drop in barometric pressure before a tornado. His eyes immediately found Nia, who was seated on the couch, her face pale but her eyes filled with a stubborn fire. Elise stood between Morales and their daughter, her frame tense, her voice trembling with anger as she tried to shield Nia from the imposing officer. Morales turned to face Adam, his expression hardening. Sir, this is a police matter. I suggest you. Adam's voice cut through the room like a blade. Get away from my family. The words weren't shouted, but the weight behind them was undeniable. It was the kind of command that made men twice Morales's size reconsider their decisions. Morales hesitated, his mouth twitching as if searching for a retort that wouldn't sound hollow. Elise took a step back, relief flickering across her face as Adam moved to stand in front of Nia. He placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her, reassuring her with the warmth of his touch. Nia looked up at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, but she didn't cry. She didn't want to be weak, not now. What's the meaning of this? Adam demanded, his gaze locking onto Morales like a predator sizing up its prey. Morales smirked, though the confidence behind it seemed forced. We're investigating a potential lead, he said. Your daughter might have information about. She's a child. Adam interrupted, his voice rising just enough to make the other officer, Sarah Reed, flinch. And she's done nothing wrong. You don't storm into someone's home and intimidate their family. You're out of line. Morales's smirk faltered, replaced by a defensive sneer. You don't get to decide how we do our job. Adam took a step forward, his towering frame making Morales instinctively step back. And you don't get to decide how you treat my family. You think you can come in here, threaten my daughter, shove your way around, and walk out like nothing happened. You're mistaken. Behind Morales, Officer Reed shifted uncomfortably. She glanced between Adam and Morales, her fingers twitching near her radio. It was clear she wasn't fully on board with Morales's actions, but fear and uncertainty kept her silent. Morales straightened his posture, trying to regain the upper hand. "You're interfering with an investigation, Mr. Brown. I suggest you back down before this gets worse for you." Adam laughed, a deep, humorless sound that sent a chill through the room. "Worse? You've already broken into my home, threatened my family, and assaulted my daughter. How much worse do you think this can get?" Morales's hand twitched near his belt, where his radio and baton hung. The tension in the room was suffocating, a taut wire ready to snap. "This doesn't have to escalate," he said, though his tone was anything but conciliatory. Adam's eyes narrowed. "It already has. Now, unless you have a warrant or legitimate cause, I suggest you leave. And don't think for a second that I won't report every word, every action, to the department and beyond." The room fell silent, the air thick with unspoken challenges. Morales's bravado was cracking, his usual tactics failing against Adam's unyielding resolve. Suddenly, Nia's voice broke through the tension, steady and defiant. "You don't scare me." Everyone turned to look at her. Morales's expression darkened, but Adam's face softened, pride shining through his anger. Nia pushed herself upright, leaning on the cane Morales had discarded earlier. Her legs wobbled, but she stood tall, meeting Morales's gaze without flinching. "You think you can just barge in here and push us around because you've got a badge?" she continued, her voice rising. "That badge doesn't give you the right to treat people like this. You're supposed to protect us, not hurt us." Morales opened his mouth to respond, but Adam held up a hand, silencing him. "You heard her," Adam said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're supposed to protect. If you can't do that, then you don't deserve to wear that uniform." The room was so quiet that the distant hum of the refrigerator was audible. Morales looked between Adam and Nia, his frustration mounting. He wasn't used to being challenged like this, especially not in a situation he thought he controlled. Finally, Morales turned to Reed. "Call for backup," he ordered, his voice strained. Reed hesitated, her hand hovering over her radio. Her eyes darted to Adam, then to Nia, and back to Morales. For the first time she spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "Maybe we should leave, Derek. This doesn't feel right." Morales glared at her, his temper flaring. "You're a rookie, Reed. Do as you're told." But Reed didn't move. She stood frozen, caught between her orders and her conscience. Adam seized the moment. "The lady's right," he said, his tone softer but no less authoritative. "You don't belong here. Walk away while you still can." For a long moment, Morales seemed to consider his options. His chest heaved with controlled breaths, and his hand clenched into a fist at his side. But Adam didn't waver, his eyes locked onto Morales's, daring him to push further. Finally, with a frustrated growl, Morales turned on his heel. "We're not done here," he muttered, storming out of the house. Reed lingered for a moment, her face pale, before she followed. As the patrol cars sped away, Adam turned back to his family. Elis wrapped her arms around Nia, holding her close as tears of relief spilled down her cheeks. Adam placed a hand on Nia's shoulder, his touch firm and reassuring. "It's over," he said softly, though his voice carried the weight of a promise. "They won't hurt you again. I'll make sure of it." But in his heart, Adam knew this was only the beginning. Morales's words echoed in his mind. "We're not done here." Adam wasn't a man who sought conflict, but for his family, he would do whatever it took. And if this was the first battle in a larger war, then so be it. He would fight, with everything he had. Shadows of justice. The silence after the patrol car's departure was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the ceiling fan in the living room. Adam stood in the middle of the room, his chest rising and falling as he tried to steady his breathing. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. Elise stood nearby, holding Nia tightly, her face buried in her daughter's shoulder, as if trying to shield her from the harsh reality of what had just happened. Nia, for her part, remained upright, her grip on her cane firm. Though her body ached and her nerves were frayed, her resolve was unshaken. She had seen something in her father during the confrontation, something raw and unyielding. It was as though he had become a shield between her and the world, and she knew, in that moment, she wasn't alone in this fight. Adam turned to them, his face softening as his gaze landed on his daughter. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice low but steady. Nia nodded, though her eyes betrayed the lingering fear she felt. "I'm okay, Dad," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But what just happened? Why did they come here?" Adam's jaw tightened. He had no answer for her, not yet. But he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Officer Moreles's parting words hung in the air like a storm cloud, a promise of further conflict. Adam wasn't a man to back down, not when his family's safety was at stake. But this was a fight he couldn't face blindly. He needed answers. "We'll figure it out," Adam said finally, his tone reassuring. "But first, I need to make some calls." Elise stepped forward, her grip on Nia loosening slightly. "Adam, what are we going to do? That man, he's dangerous." Adam placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We'll handle it, Elise," he said firmly. "I'm not going to let him, or anyone else, hurt our family." Elise nodded, though worry lingered in her eyes. She knew her husband well enough to understand that when he made a promise, he kept it. But she also knew the risks involved in challenging someone like Morales, a man who clearly thrived on intimidation and abuse of power. Adam pulled his phone from his pocket and stepped into the kitchen, dialing a number he hadn't used in years. It rang twice before a deep voice answered. "Tom's law office. How can I help you?" "Tom, it's Adam Brown," Adam said, his voice clipped. "I need your help." Tom Grayson had been Adam's friend since high school, a man who had dedicated his life to practicing law in their small town. Though they hadn't spoken much in recent years, Adam knew Tom was someone he could trust, someone who understood the nuances of justice and the gray areas where it often faltered. "Adam," Tom said, his tone immediately shifting to concern. "What's going on? You sound tense." Adam gave him a brief rundown of the evening's events, sparing no detail. By the time he finished, Tom's voice was sharp with indignation. "They forced their way into your home, and Morales assaulted your daughter." "That's right," Adam said grimly, "and he didn't even have a warrant. I need to know what I can do. How do I protect my family from this kind of abuse?" Tom sighed heavily on the other end of the line. "This isn't the first complaint I've heard about Morales," he admitted. "But proving misconduct isn't easy, especially when it's his word against yours. Still, the fact that he entered your home without a warrant, that's a serious violation." "So what do we do?" Adam pressed. "We start by documenting everything," Tom said. "Write down every detail of what happened tonight. Elise and Nia should do the same. I'll reach out to a few contacts and see if there's any record of Morales's previous complaints. If we can build a case against him, we might be able to get him off the force, or at least hold him accountable." Adam nodded, his grip tightening on the phone. "Thanks, Tom. I appreciate it." "You don't need to thank me," Tom said firmly. "This is what I do. And Adam, don't let him intimidate you. Men like Morales thrive on fear. The moment you show them you're not afraid, they start to lose their power." Adam ended the call and returned to the living room, where Elise and Nia were seated on the couch. He relayed Tom's advice, and the three of them spent the next hour writing down everything they could remember about the incident. Elise's handwriting was steady but fierce, her anger evident in the sharpness of her pen strokes. Nia, though still shaken, took her time, carefully recounting every word, every action. When they finished, Adam gathered the papers and placed them in a folder. "This is just the beginning," he said. "We're not going to let this slide." Elise nodded, her resolve hardening. "What about Morales? He's not going to back off easily." Adam exhaled slowly, his expression darkening. "I know, But we're not alone in this. Tom's going to help us, and I'll do whatever it takes to keep our family safe." That night, as the family tried to settle back into some semblance of normalcy, Adam sat at the kitchen table, his laptop open in front of him. He searched for any information he could find on Morales, combing through news articles and public records. What he found didn't surprise him. Complaints of excessive force, allegations of misconduct, but none of it had ever led to disciplinary action. Morales had always managed to avoid consequences, protected by a system that seemed designed to shield him. As the hours ticked by, Adam's frustration grew. He knew this fight wouldn't be easy. Morales wasn't just a corrupt officer. He was a symptom of a larger problem, a system that allowed men like him to operate with impunity. But Adam wasn't deterred. He had faced challenges before, losing his wife to illness, raising 2 children on his own, supporting Nia through countless surgeries and therapy sessions. He had weathered storms that would have broken lesser men. This was just another storm, and he would weather it too. Finally, just as the clock struck midnight, Adam closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. His mind was racing with plans, strategies, and contingencies. He wasn't a lawyer or an activist, but he was a father, and that was more than enough. As he turned off the lights and headed to bed, Adam knew one thing for certain: Morales had picked the wrong family to mess with. The fight for justice had only just begun. The gathering storm. Adam's resolve hardened as he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling in the dark. The night was eerily quiet, the oppressive stillness pressing against his chest. Sleep didn't come easily. His mind refused to rest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Morales's sneering face and the look of fear in Nia's eyes. It churned in his gut like acid. This wasn't just about Morales anymore. It was about every officer who had abused their authority and every system that allowed them to get away with it. Finally, unable to lie still any longer, Adam slipped out of bed and into the living room. The dim light from the street lamp outside filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room. He glanced at the folder on the coffee table, the one holding their written accounts of the evening. It felt like both a shield and a burden, a reminder of the battle ahead. Adam sat down at the table and opened his laptop again, determined to dig deeper. If Morales had a history, Adam would find it. If there were other families who had suffered under Morales's hand, Adam would reach them. The system might be stacked against him, but he wasn't fighting this battle alone. The search for allies. By the time the first rays of sunlight crept through the window, Adam had unearthed more than he anticipated. Morales's name was linked to several civil complaints in nearby towns, ranging from verbal abuse to unnecessary use of force. Most of the cases had been quietly settled out of court, with non-disclosure agreements silencing the victims. But a few names and details had slipped through the cracks, enough for Adam to work with. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. He knew he couldn't fight this fight on his own. He needed allies, people who understood what it meant to stand up to injustice. The first step was finding the others who had been wronged. If they could come together, their voices would be harder to ignore. Adam pulled out his phone and called Tom again, knowing his friend would be awake by now. "Adam," Tom said, answering on the first ring. "I was hoping you'd call. I've been thinking about Morales all night. I found some names," Adam said without preamble. "Families who've had run-ins with him. I need your help reaching out to them." Tom didn't hesitate. "Send me what you have. I'll start making calls today." Adam sent the list of names and leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He had always believed in the power of community, in people coming together to fight for what was right. Morales might have the badge and the system on his side, but Adam had something stronger: the truth. A spark ignites. By mid-morning, the Brown household was alive with quiet tension. Elise moved through the kitchen, preparing breakfast with mechanical precision, while Nia sat at the dining table, absently scrolling through her phone. Her bruises from the night before were faint but visible, a stark reminder of what had happened. Adam walked into the room, his presence immediately grounding. He placed a hand on Nia's shoulder and smiled down at her. "How are you feeling, kiddo?" Nia looked up at him, her expression thoughtful. "Better," she said. "I was thinking, maybe we shouldn't stay quiet about this." Adam raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe we should tell people what happened," Nia said, her voice gaining strength. "If we don't speak up, Morales will just keep doing this to other people." Adam felt a swell of pride in his chest. Despite everything she had been through, Nia's courage hadn't wavered. "You're right," he said, "but we have to be smart about it. We'll share our story when the time is right, and we'll make sure it counts." Nia nodded, a spark of determination in her eyes. For the first time since the incident, Adam felt a glimmer of hope. They weren't just victims, they were fighters. A community stirs. That afternoon, Tom called back with promising news. "I've spoken to 2 families who've had experiences with Morales," he said. "They're willing to talk. One of them even has video evidence from an incident a few months ago." Adam's heart leaped. "That's great. What's the next step?" "We'll need to gather as much evidence as we can," Tom said. "If we can show a pattern of abuse, we'll have a stronger case. But we'll also need public support. This isn't just about Morales. It's about the department that enables him. We'll need to shine a spotlight on the whole system." Adam agreed, and they began to formulate a plan. Over the next few days, Adam met with the families Tom had connected him with. Each meeting was a mix of pain and solidarity, as they shared their stories and their frustrations with the system that had failed them. One by one, they added their voices to the growing chorus, determined to bring Morales to justice. Word began to spread through Cedar Grove, first in whispers, and then in louder conversations. Neighbors stopped by the Brown house to offer their support, and a few even shared their own stories of run-ins with Morales. The community, once fragmented by fear, was beginning to come together. The first strike. By the end of the week, Adam and Tom had enough evidence to take their fight public. They held a meeting at the local community center, inviting anyone who had been affected by police misconduct or wanted to support the cause. The turnout was larger than Adam expected. Dozens of people filled the small room, their faces a mix of anger and determination. Adam stood at the front of the room, his hands resting on the podium. He wasn't used to public speaking, but this wasn't about him. It was about Nia, about the other families, about justice. He took a deep breath and began. "Thank you all for being here," he said, his voice steady. "I know it's not easy to stand up and speak out, especially against those who are supposed to protect us, but we can't stay silent anymore. Officer Morales isn't just one bad apple. He's part of a system that has failed us, and it's time we held that system accountable." The room erupted into applause, the energy palpable. One by one, people began to share their stories, their voices weaving together into a powerful narrative of resilience and defiance. As the meeting came to a close, Adam looked out at the crowd and felt something shift. This wasn't just about his family anymore. This was a movement. And it was only just beginning. The fire spreads. The meeting at the community center was a catalyst, the spark that ignited a movement far beyond what Adam had anticipated. The following days brought a flurry of activity, as the stories shared in that small room began to ripple outward, carried by word of mouth and the power of social media. The echoes of truth. It started with a single post. A young man named Jacob Perez, one of the attendees, shared his account of being harassed by Officer Morales during a routine traffic stop. His story, raw and unfiltered, resonated with others who had suffered similar experiences. Within hours, comments flooded the post, each one a small piece of a larger puzzle. By the end of the day, the post had been shared over 1,000 times, reaching people far beyond Cedar Grove. Inspired by Jacob's courage, others began sharing their stories online. Videos surfaced, some shaky and grainy, showing Morales' heavy-handed tactics, A woman named Evelyn Chang posted footage of Morales forcing her teenage son to the ground during what should have been a routine questioning. Another video showed him yelling at a man who had asked for his badge number. The stories painted a damning picture, one that was impossible to ignore. The community's collective voice grew louder, demanding accountability and change. The hashtag #JusticeFornia began trending, transforming a local issue into a rallying cry for a much larger audience. The media takes notice. It didn't take long for the media to catch wind of the growing unrest in Cedar Grove. Reporters descended on the small town, their cameras and microphones eager to capture the story that was quickly becoming a national headline. Adam, who had always valued his privacy, found himself thrust into the spotlight. Initially hesitant, Adam knew he couldn't let the narrative be twisted. If the world was watching, they needed to see the truth. With Tom by his side, he agreed to an interview with a local news station. Sitting in the modest living room of his home, Adam spoke with quiet determination about what had happened to Nia and the broader issues of abuse of power and systemic failures. The interview aired that evening, and the response was immediate. Messages of support poured in from across the country, from people who had experienced similar injustices and from those who simply wanted to stand in solidarity. Donations began to trickle in, unsolicited but deeply appreciated, to support the legal battle that was looming. But with the support came resistance. Online trolls and critics questioned Adam's motives, accusing him of trying to smear the police or seeking attention. Some even suggested that Nia's disability was being used as a ploy for sympathy. The vitriol was disheartening, but Adam refused to let it deter him. For every hateful comment, there were dozens more messages of encouragement, reminding him why this fight was necessary. A family under siege. As the movement gained momentum, the Brown family found themselves under increasing scrutiny. Police cruisers began driving by their house more frequently, their presence a clear attempt at intimidation. Nia noticed the stares and whispers when she went to school, her classmates unsure of how to approach her. Even Jordan, normally carefree and full of energy, became quieter, sensing the tension that hung over their home. Elise tried to keep the household running smoothly, but the strain was evident in her every movement. One evening, as she sat at the kitchen table folding laundry, she looked up at Adam, her eyes heavy with worry. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" she asked softly. Adam placed a hand over hers, his expression resolute. "We don't have a choice, Elise. If we don't stand up now, nothing will change. Not for Nia, not for anyone." Elise nodded, though her worry didn't dissipate. "I just want our family to be safe." "We will be," Adam promised, though he couldn't ignore the knot of uncertainty in his own chest. The town divides. As the movement grew, Cedar Grove began to split into factions. Many rallied behind the Browns, inspired by their courage and the undeniable evidence against Morales. But others, particularly those with ties to the police department, pushed back, accusing the family of stirring unnecessary trouble. Tensions came to a head during a town hall meeting called by the mayor to address the growing unrest. The community center was packed, the air electric with anticipation. Adam and Tom sat in the front row, surrounded by supporters, while Morales and a few of his colleagues lingered near the back, their faces unreadable. Mayor Helen Griffith, a middle-aged woman with a reputation for pragmatism, stood at the podium, her expression grave. "We're here to discuss the concerns that have been raised regarding our police department," she began, her voice steady but cautious. "This is an opportunity for open dialogue. I ask that everyone remain respectful." The meeting quickly descended into chaos. Supporters of the Browns demanded answers, their voices raised in frustration. Opponents shouted back, accusing the family of vilifying the police. Adam stayed quiet, his jaw clenched as he listened to the back and forth. It wasn't until a woman in the crowd accused Nia of lying that he finally stood. "All right, that's enough." Adam's voice boomed across the room, silencing the chaos. He stepped forward, his tall frame commanding attention. "This isn't about politics, and it's not about tearing down the police. It's about accountability. My daughter was assaulted in her own home by someone who swore to protect and serve, and she's not the only one. The room fell silent, the weight of Adam's words settling over the crowd. Morales shifted uncomfortably at the back of the room, his jaw tightening. Adam continued, his voice unwavering. We're not here to destroy the system. We're here to fix it. Because if we don't, who will? A line in the sand. The town hall ended without resolution, but it marked a turning point. Lines were drawn, alliances formed, and the battle for justice took on a life of its own. The Browns found themselves at the center of a storm, but they were no longer standing alone. As the days turned into weeks, Adam and his allies worked tirelessly to build their case. They gathered more stories, more evidence, and more support. Every step forward was met with resistance, but every victory, no matter how small, fueled their determination. And through it all, Naya remained a beacon of resilience. Despite the challenges, she refused to let fear define her. She spoke at rallies, sharing her story with a bravery that inspired everyone around her. Her voice, clear and unwavering, became the heart of the movement. For Adam, seeing his daughter's strength was all the motivation he needed. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but he knew one thing for sure. They were fighting for something bigger than themselves, and no matter what obstacles lay in their path, they would not back down. The fire had been lit, and it would not be extinguished. The turning tide. The movement gained traction in ways Adam never imagined. What began as a fight for his family transformed into a community-driven crusade for justice. The hashtag #JusticeFornia trended nationwide, and Cedar Grove became a symbol of both systemic failure and grassroots resilience. But the more visibility the movement garnered, the greater the pushback. Adam, Elise, and Nia quickly learned that fighting for justice wasn't just about uncovering the truth, it was about enduring the weight of resistance. The cost of resistance. In the days following the contentious town hall meeting, the backlash intensified. Anonymous threats started arriving in their mailbox, scrawled on scraps of paper or typed out in chillingly clinical detail. Phone calls came at odd hours, the silence on the other end speaking louder than words. Adam tried to shield his family from the worst of it, but he couldn't keep everything from them. One morning, as Elise brought in the mail, she froze on the porch, staring at an envelope with no return address. She opened it with trembling hands, her breath catching at the contents. A printed photo of Nia at her school, with the words, "Stay quiet or else," written in bold red letters. Elise rushed inside, her face pale. "Adam," she called, holding the letter out. "Look at this." Adam took the letter, his expression darkening as he read the words. His hands clenched into fists, crumpling the paper. "They're trying to scare us," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "But it won't work." Nia appeared in the doorway, her cane tapping softly against the floor. "What's going on?" she asked, her brow furrowing as she noticed the tension in the room. Elise hesitated, but Adam handed her the letter. "You need to see this," he said. "We're not hiding things from each other." Nia read the letter, her face hardening. Instead of fear, there was anger in her eyes. "They think they can scare me," she said, her voice steady. "They think I'll back down." Adam placed a hand on her shoulder, pride mixing with concern. "We won't let them win, but we have to be careful, Nia. This fight is bigger than us now." Nia nodded, her resolve unwavering. "I understand, Dad, but we can't let them stop us." A legal breakthrough. While the threats loomed, Tom Grayson worked tirelessly behind the scenes. He combed through records, filed complaints, and coordinated with journalists who were willing to investigate Morales' history. His work finally bore fruit when he unearthed a critical piece of evidence, an internal memo from the Cedar Grove Police Department that referenced multiple complaints against Morales, including excessive force and falsified reports. Tom called Adam late one evening, his excitement barely contained. "Adam, we've got him," he said. "This memo proves the department knew about Morales' behavior and did nothing." Adam's grip on the phone tightened. "How did you get this?" "Let's just say I have a friend on the inside," Tom replied. "It's not enough on its own, but it's a crack in the wall. We can use this to pressure the department into a corner." Adam's mind raced. What's the next step? "We go public," Tom said. "This memo needs to see the light of day. If we release it strategically, it'll force the department to respond. And once the media gets hold of it, Morales won't be able to hide." The decision to go public wasn't made lightly. Adam knew it would escalate the fight, putting his family under even more scrutiny. But he also knew they couldn't win by staying silent. The storm breaks. A week later, the memo was published in the Cedar Grove Gazette, accompanied by an investigative report detailing Morales's history of misconduct. The article painted a damning picture, not just of Morales, but of a department that had repeatedly failed to hold him accountable. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Protests erupted outside the police station, with residents demanding Morales's suspension and a full investigation into the department's practices. The media swarmed Cedar Grove, amplifying the voices of those who had suffered under Morales's abuse. Morales, for his part, went into hiding, refusing to answer questions from reporters. The police department issued a brief statement, claiming the memo was under review and promising to cooperate fully with any inquiries. But the statement did little to quell the growing outrage. For the Brown family, the fallout was both empowering and exhausting. Strangers stopped them on the street to offer their support, but the threats also escalated. Police cruisers still lingered near their house, and one night, someone threw a brick through their front window. On it was written a single word: enough. Strength in solidarity. Despite the mounting pressure, the Browns found strength in the support of their community. Their home became a hub for the movement, with neighbors, friends, and activists gathering to plan protests and strategy. Nia took an active role, speaking at rallies and sharing her story with a courage that inspired everyone around her. At one such rally, held in the town square, Nia stood before a crowd of hundreds, her voice ringing out over the amplified speakers. "They tried to silence me," she said, her hands gripping the edges of the podium. "They told me I was weak, that I was nothing. But they were wrong. I am not weak. I am not nothing. And neither are any of you." The crowd erupted into cheers, their chants of "justice for Nia" echoing through the square. Adam watched from the sidelines, his heart swelling with pride. His daughter, who had faced so many challenges, was now leading the charge for change. The department responds. Under immense pressure, the Cedar Grove Police Department finally took action. Morales was placed on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation. The chief of police held a press conference, promising reforms and greater transparency. But for Adam and the others, it wasn't enough. "We don't just want promises," Adam said in an interview with a national news outlet. "We want accountability. Morales needs to face the consequences of his actions, and the department needs to answer for its failures." As the investigation progressed, more officers came forward, anonymously sharing their own concerns about Morales and the culture within the department. The cracks in the system grew wider, exposing a rot that went far beyond one man. A turning point. Late one night, as Adam sat in the living room going over strategy with Tom, there was a knock at the door. Ellis answered cautiously, finding Officer Sarah Reed standing on the porch. Reed, the young rookie who had been with Morales during the incident, looked nervous but determined. "I need to talk to you," she said, off the record. Adam invited her in, and she began to speak, her voice trembling at first, but gaining strength as she went on. She described the pressure she felt to stay silent, the fear of retaliation if she spoke out against Morales. But she also described the guilt, the weight of knowing she had been complicit by doing nothing. "I want to help," Reed said, her eyes meeting Adam's. "I'll testify. I'll tell the truth about what happened that night and everything I've seen since I joined the force." Her offer was a turning point, a crack of light in the darkness. With her testimony and the evidence they had gathered, Adam knew they were closer than ever to achieving justice. As the legal battle loomed, Adam felt the weight of the journey they had taken. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, he could see a path forward. The tide was turning, and the fire they had ignited would not be extinguished. Their fight had become a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of resilience and unity. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Adam knew they would walk it together, stronger than ever. Justice in the light. The morning sun spilled golden light across Cedar Grove, but for Adam Brown, the warmth of the day felt distant. The fight for justice had consumed his every waking moment, and now, as the family prepared for the most important day yet, the weight of it all pressed heavily on his shoulders. Today was the start of Officer Morales' disciplinary hearing. It wasn't a trial, yet, but it was a crucial step toward accountability. The hearing would determine whether Morales would face formal charges, and for the Brown family and the community, it was their chance to shine a spotlight on the corruption that had plagued the town for far too long. A community stands together. The courthouse steps were packed with supporters. Signs bearing messages like "Justice for Nia," "Hold Morales accountable," and "End police brutality" filled the air. The crowd was diverse: families, young activists, elderly residents who had lived in Cedar Grove their whole lives. What united them was a shared determination to see justice done. Adam, Elise, Nia, and Jordan arrived together, walking through the crowd with heads held high. As they approached the courthouse doors, the crowd erupted into applause and chants of "Justice for Nia." Adam felt a surge of gratitude and pride. This wasn't just about his family anymore. It was about the entire community standing against injustice. Tom Grayson met them at the entrance, his expression serious but encouraging. "You ready for this?" he asked Adam. "As ready as we'll ever be," Adam replied. He glanced at Nia, who was standing tall, her cane firmly in hand. "You okay, kiddo?" Nia nodded, her eyes blazing with determination. "I'm ready, Dad." The hearing begins. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Officer Morales sat at the defense table, his face a mask of defiance. He was flanked by his attorney, a sharp-looking man who exuded confidence. Across the room, Adam and his family sat with Tom and a small team of pro bono lawyers who had stepped up to support their case. The hearing began with opening statements. Tom spoke eloquently about the pattern of abuse, the evidence they had gathered, and the impact Morales' actions had on the community. He highlighted Nia's story as a catalyst for change, emphasizing her courage in standing up to an officer who had abused his power. The defense attorney tried to paint a different picture. He argued that Morales was a dedicated officer who had been unfairly targeted by a media frenzy. He suggested that the Brown family was exaggerating their claims to gain sympathy and attention. Adam clenched his fists under the table, anger simmering as he listened to the defense. But he stayed silent, knowing their chance to speak was coming. Nia's testimony. When Nia was called to the stand, the room fell silent. Adam's heart ached as he watched her make her way to the witness stand, leaning heavily on her cane. Despite her physical struggles, her spirit was unbroken. She took the oath, her voice steady, as she promised to tell the truth. Tom approached her gently, his questions designed to give her the opportunity to tell her story in her own words. Nia described the events of that night with clarity and poise, recounting how Morales had forced his way into their home, grabbed her cane, and shoved her to the ground. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke of the fear she felt, but her eyes never wavered. "What did you think when your father arrived?" Tom asked. Nia took a deep breath. "I thought we were finally safe," she said. "But I also realize that we can't just rely on one person to protect us. We have to protect each other. That's why I'm here, because no one should have to go through what I went through." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of her words settling over everyone present. Even some of Morales' supporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats. When the defense attorney cross-examined her, he tried to discredit her account, suggesting that she had misinterpreted Morales's actions. But Nia held her ground, calmly refuting his claims and maintaining her composure. The evidence speaks. After Nia's testimony, Tom presented the evidence they had gathered. Video footage of Morales's previous misconduct, the internal memo showing the department's knowledge of his actions, and testimonies from other victims. The courtroom buzzed with tension as each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of a man who had abused his power for years. One of the most damning moments came when Officer Sarah Reed took the stand. Her testimony was a turning point. She described the pressure she felt to stay silent, the fear of retaliation, and the moment she realized she couldn't stand by any longer. "I joined the force to serve and protect," she said, her voice steady. "But what I saw that night, and in the weeks leading up to it, made me question everything. Officer Morales's actions were not just unethical. They were dangerous, and the department's failure to act enabled him." Her words sent ripples through the room. It was clear that the tide was turning. A community united. As the hearing stretched into the afternoon, the courtroom filled with a sense of urgency. The defense fought hard, trying to downplay Morales's actions and shift the blame onto the system. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the voices of the victims were undeniable. When the final arguments were made, the judge announced that a decision would be rendered the following day. As the room emptied, Adam felt a mixture of exhaustion and hope. They had done everything they could. Now it was in the hands of the system they were fighting to change. The verdict. The next morning, the courtroom was packed once again. The judge entered, her expression unreadable as she prepared to deliver her decision. After reviewing the evidence and testimony, she began, "It is clear that Officer Derek Morales engaged in conduct unbecoming of an officer, including excessive use of force and violations of constitutional rights. Furthermore, the Cedar Grove Police Department's failure to address these issues demonstrates a systemic problem that must be rectified." The room erupted in murmurs, but the judge raised her hand for silence. "Officer Morales will be formally charged, and I am recommending an independent investigation into the department's practices." Relief washed over Adam as he turned to his family. Elise was crying quietly, her hand over her mouth, while Nia sat in stunned silence, a small smile breaking across her face. The road ahead. The victory in the courtroom was significant, but it was just the beginning. The investigation into the department uncovered deeper issues, leading to the resignation of the police chief and several reforms aimed at increasing accountability and transparency. For the Brown family, life slowly began to return to normal. The threats and scrutiny subsided, replaced by a sense of pride and purpose. Nia became a symbol of resilience, her story inspiring others to stand up against injustice. One evening, as the family sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over Cedar Grove, Adam turned to Nia. "You changed everything," he said, his voice filled with emotion. Nia smiled. "We did, Dad. Together." The fight for justice had tested them in ways they never expected, but it had also brought them closer. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, their light shining brighter than ever. And though the road ahead would still hold challenges, they knew they could face anything, as long as they stood together.